these prisons, the for-profit prisons that are run by ICE detentions, because again, this is a civil process, remember, it's not a criminal process. So they aren't under regulation. They basically operate on the basis of local agreements. There's nothing fucking regulating this. And what that ends up looking like are these detention facilities that they're not providing healthcare anymore.
Yeah.
They're not providing schooling for these kids. They're detaining children. There are children inside American prisons. What we're talking about is something that, the atrocity level, and I appreciate this question of is this the gulag? Are we all going in? But that really shouldn't be our question, because there are people who are already in. And if we're not separating, if we don't believe that we are more worthy, that our lives are more worthy than these people, then the atrocity is already here.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Right of Resistance. I'm Chorus Charney. My guest today is Heba Gowayed. She is a writer, sociology professor at Hunter College and Carnegie Fellow. Her award-winning book, Refuge: How the State Shapes Human Potential, follows displaced Syrians in the United States, Canada, and Germany, showing how destination countries can often constrain rather than cultivate human potential. Her forthcoming book, The Cost of Borders, examines how borders operate not just as markers of sovereign territory, but as costly and often deadly systems of security. She argues that as borders expand, they don't just keep people out, they erode democratic rights and civil liberties within their own countries. Heba Gowayed, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Kuros. It's nice to be here.
Well, thank you. So we have much to talk about, and your work is particularly relevant these days.
Fortunately.
Yes, unfortunately. So yesterday there was the latest abduction of a Columbia student by ICE agents, who this time lied about who they were. Right? They said they were police officers looking for a missing child to get into her building. So I thought we could talk a little bit about that as a jumping off point, as sort of the broader, issue of ICE being deployed somewhat relentlessly, and kind of how it functions, not just to deport immigrants, but as this kind of arm of state power.
Yeah. Um, the abduction yesterday is interesting on a lot of different levels. So this was a student, Elia Rayeva, 29 years old. She's in the School of Continuing Studies, and she is, in addition to being seemingly a very hardworking student, she's also a social media influencer of sorts. She's like a day in the life influencer. And so she has 100,000 followers on Instagram, 100,000 followers on TikTok. Um, and what was really just so jarring and kind of, sickening was looking at her story, um, because her story's up to, on Instagram, you can post your stories, and her story's up to the night before last, right? Because she was abducted yesterday at 6:30 a.m. The story is the night before last. It's just her studying her genetics exam. She's like 10 hours in the life of a Columbia student. And you go to the cafeteria where she has her food, and you go to the library with her, and just really normal stuff. And then the very next image is of her niece saying, DHS has just legally detained me, please help.
Yeah.
And it set out this flurry of, responses. And even in this case, contrary to how Columbia responded to the abductions of Palestinian students who were abducted from their campus, depending on who you ask, seemingly at their behest. What you have is a situation in which Columbia responds. They immediately get her legal counsel. They respond the way that you would expect, for that you had wished that academic institutions had responded prior. The mayor steps in immediately and secures her release. And, through a machination with Trump, which, Memdani magic, we don't know how that happened. So I think there are a lot of things about this that are both emblematic of what this moment is, in terms of the dramatic expansion of ICE, the cruelty, the brutalization, the lying, the borders within, all of that. And then there are some parts about it where, as we sort of digest it in the coming days, that reveal um, the complicity of institutions in the other instances where we didn't see this immediate reaction and response. So I think it's actually a very interesting case to talk about, both about what we can do, what hasn't been done in other cases. For instance, Liqa Cordeya, who's a young student, who was protesting outside of Colombia and who was detained by ICE, is still in ICE detention a year later, despite having had a seizure recently.
Yeah.
Mahmoud Khalil's life and his security and his family's security, along with his baby, is still being threatened. And so there's a real sort of question as to why is it that the response was so quick here. I'm very grateful that the response was very quick. This was a very harrowing and jarring thing to happen to a young woman. But why is the response not as quick in other places, and with other people? And I think we know part of the answer, which is the Palestine exception, which is kind of what prompted this all happening on college campuses in the first place.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, uh, it's disconcerting, obviously, that seems to be such a clear-cut reason. Of course, that raises the larger question, right, of all of this, non-Palestine related ICE violence happening. Obviously, Minneapolis has been the main focus of this over the past couple of months. People in Minneapolis referring to it as an occupation. Um, so, I mean, it does raise a lot of questions about what is going on, right? I mean, obviously, this is Trump following through on, one of his main campaign promises, right? Which is to basically target every single person who could possibly, be deported, who could, warrant a deportation, but then apparently also going after just everyone or everyone whose, immigration status is, um, vulnerable to being targeted in some way. Eh, maybe we should start by talking a little bit about ICE's formation, why it was formed, and kind of how that informs how ICE operates, because it was formed after 9/11, right? And so ICE's approach to immigration is not simply about immigration, right?
So ICE was formed, so the Department of Homeland Security as a whole was
Yes.
formed right after 9/11 in the name of sort of protecting national security. Um, and their mandate, and I think a lot of people are kind of confused about this, their mandate is 100% removal. So
Mhm.
anybody whose documentation is not solid, their mandate is to remove all of those people. And what that ends up looking like in a country like the United States, where most people actually don't fall into a dichotomy of documented or undocumented. A lot of people hold what sociologists have termed liminal legal status, which is like, for instance, they came on a student visa, they're applying for a new visa, they might be in the process of application right now. Their first one is expired, their next one is still pending. So they're technically covered in a system that where we recognize processes. But if somebody wanted to say that that person, lacked documentation, they could also potentially do that, right? So there's like this, there's this mandate that ICE has that is directly sort of setting them up for cruelty, even if we ignore the fact that immediately upon their formation, there were these registers of Muslim men. Immediately upon their formation, right, came along with the Patriot Act. I mean, that the surveillance apparatus of the state had been dramatically expanded through the frame of the Department of Homeland Security, right? And I think the focus on ICE is actually kind of um, too narrow, right? So obviously we need to focus on ICE. Obviously, ICE needs to be abolished, but the real sort of uh, uh, cruelty, right? The real sort of thing that we're talking about is this Department of Homeland Security, whose mandate is surveillance, whose
Mhm.
mandate is to create an apparatus by which to control and sort of secure the United States through these means that are often were not legal. prior, right? So through invasions of privacy, through these massive security drive nets, through these enforcement systems, um, that are really brutal in the way that they operate. So another aspect of this, for instance, is Customs and Border Patrol, which we just saw left a man, Nur al-Alam Sheikh, who was a resettled refugee from Burma, survived a genocide, but did not survive the violence of American enforcement arm, because they left him, they illegally detained him. He had full legal papers. He was detained first by the sheriff, who turned him over to CBP, which just tells you the amount of racism that's there.
Yeah.
Who then just left him out in the cold. Blind. He's blind. He has chronic health issues. Doesn't speak English, and he dies. Right, the man dies. He doesn't make it. They leave him 5 miles away from his family. Nobody's able to find him. He's not able to contact them, and he dies in the elements because they
Was
left him there.
was that just, I mean, yeah, when I heard about that, and maybe this sounds like a very naive question, but I mean, was that just pure sadism? Is there some particular policy that, okay, well, when it's confirmed that they have no reason to detain this person, they just dump him wherever they are? I mean, what
They so
you know what I mean?
no,
It's like
Heroes,
where
the thing about it is that, people are looking at this specific case. The United States southern border is the deadliest land route in the world. There
uh
are people whose entire organizations are structured, they call themselves the armadillos. They're structured to find people's bodies in the desert who have been neglected, who nobody has, who have been denied water by these same people. Right?
uh-huh,
We have a government that prior to this, and this is prior to Trump, was establishing robo-dogs to shoot
yeah,
people on sight in the desert. When you have a system that's predicated on an enforcement apparatus of these huge behemoths of tech and steel in the forms of wall and technology that stretch far from the frontier and stretch far within, those aren't apparatus that can see the humanity of a person, right? Those
mhm,
are apparatus that repel, deny, kill, and then ask questions later. And so what you have is an entire system predicated on not seeing the person as a person. I mean, leaving him out is not the worst thing that they've done by a mile.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so when we talk about it, and a lot of people, specifically with this case, have talked about, all the things that went wrong, right? So the sheriff's office turning him over, and for instance, in New York, we have New York for All, which is a policy that would not allow for that kind of cooperation between local PD and these federal agents. But in that case, they didn't have it. Sheriff's office turned him over. CBP detains him despite not having any evidence that they accept him, despite there being no evidence that this man doesn't have documentation. And then they leave him. And a lot of people are sort of focusing on all of those little things. They're focusing on the fact, and they're putting a lot of weight on the fact that he's blind, that he has a chronic illness, that he doesn't speak English. But really, this is systemic. This is not sort of an anomaly in which all of these different factors have collided to create this tragedy. The tragedy is the system. The tragedy has always been the system. And it was formed on the basis of it was formed to be violent. It was not
yeah,
formed to have a humanistic aspect or to really secure anyone. It was formed to enforce and formed to surveil. And as soon as we realize that, then we can realize. And I take issue with small friendly issue is something you said. You're like, what about ICE outside of Palestine? But you can't think about ICE outside of Palestine, because a lot of the technology that is being used that ICE is deploying was actually developed. A lot of the surveillance tech was actually developed by Israel on Palestinians. That's now
yeah,
being used to surveil phones, to the facial recognition technology. All of
yeah,
that was developed in this space and then brought here in order to be used by ICE to expand the surveillance operation. And so
yeah,
what we're having is a system that needs more and more tech, more and more violence. It's insatiable, and whose mandate is just this kind of enforcement.
yeah. Did I say ICE outside of Palestine? Well,
We're like,
what's
other than Palestine. I was like,
oh
there's no ICE
well,
other than
sorry,
Palestine.
yeah,
It's
I
not
meant
a
in
it's not a
addition.
real beef. It's not
Well,
a real beef. It's just to keep
no,
people
no, no, I
alive
was
in
just
Kuwait.
sure. No, but you know what's funny actually is I'd posted something on social media about ICE training with the IDF, and someone of course had to say, oh, they also train in with Canada, and of course my response was like, well, okay, but I don't think they learn street executions from
They didn't, yeah, from Canada.
yeah,
But
from the
Canadians
Royal,
can
yeah, the
us too,
whatever, the
though.
mounted police. I mean, not to say, look, and I know it's, I mean, I know it's complicated in terms of the various organizations they train with, but yeah, I mean, obviously you see a particular style, for lack of a better word, of enforcement, that definitely parallels what is being done in Palestine. And obviously, there's much to talk about in terms of tactics and technology, about what goes on in Palestine and then how it ends up here. Um, well, question then, and maybe this is a bit Orwellian, maybe not, but do you think that ICE and Homeland Security, more broadly, was simply an extreme overcorrection response to 9/11, or do you think that this was the government seeing an opportunity to say, hey, this is a perfect time to increase the surveillance state and you know
Yeah, I definitely think it's the latter, and I think that we
yeah.
have the empirics to back that up. So, like, if you
Hmm.
look at Clinton era, if you look at, like,
Yeah.
any of these, we have which basically, increase the possibility of local enforcement, federal enforcement to cooperate, criminalized immigrants. We have, since um, since 1965, and this is specifically on the immigration front, but we could also talk about sort of the policing of the carceral state, right? But since 1965, when racial quotas for immigration were abolished, so prior to 1965, only white people could migrate here legally, which is also, as an aside, my beef when people talk about legal and illegal immigrants, which I think reflect the morality of the ruler rather than the morality of anybody who holds either one of these designations. Laws are constructed, right?
Yeah.
So prior to 1965, it would be illegal for anybody black or brown to immigrate here.
Right.
And then after 1965, as those racial quotas were abolished, you know, American migration became blacker and browner. And in that same process, you lose welfare rights for immigrants. You have narrowing of immigration channels. You have increased spending on detention and enforcement, and massively reduced spending on the adjudication of immigrant claims. Right, when people come and bring their claim, the adjudication or the process of immigration. You have harsher and harsher sort of immigration services that are understaffed, but your prisons get bigger. Right? And this mirrors, this sort of follows a trend in the United States of for-profit carceral systems, right? And the dramatic expansion of the policing apparatus at our local level, at a federal level. And so what you get, and the thing about this, and Todd Miller is a journalist who's written on this, a lot of people have written on this, which is that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, this notion of security or the notion of the need for enforcement, right? Because once you start buying this stuff, first of all, now there's an industry for it that's selling you on more and more stuff that it tells you that you need. You're in a mindset of security, and if you're in a mindset of security, if the stuff is working, if you're seeing a reduction in crime because you're getting more and more of the stuff, then you need more stuff, right? But if you're not seeing a reduction in crime, then you still need more stuff because you just must not have enough of that stuff, right? So and what has happened is that there's the formation of this gargantuan industry of violence. And GEO Group, which is one of the companies that is the top company that's building these detention facilities in which immigrants are detained, is also a for-profit prison provider, right? So it's not, these aren't sort of separate stories, they're the same story. And I think that in that post 9/11 moment, right, it never makes anybody more secure to reduce the rights of of people, right? If we the minute that you dehumanize somebody, the minute that you say it's okay to deny the due process or deny the human rights of this person right here, everybody becomes less secure. And this is a historical fact. It's true everywhere all the time, with very rare things that are
Hmm.
true everywhere all the time. And so what has happened here is that this was done with the public's full agreement on a national level from 2003, where it really sort of took hold, post 9/11, et cetera. And it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. So right now, before the Trump administration took over, there's $410 billion spent on border enforcement in the United States, which was just a sevenfold increase in those 20 years, which is just an astronomical amount of money that dwarfs spending on any other kind of social good if you take into consideration like how many people it affects. You have a dramatic expansion of the surveillance apparatus to the point that we're even talking about this use of this technology where ICE is taking out a contract that can hack all of our phones, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about just a complete and unfathomable. And the idea that this is only going, like, there's no way for a surveillance technology, even if it was just used on immigrants, that would still be awful, right? But there's no way for a surveillance technology to parse your documentation via this system, right? So what it is it's just a surveillance of all Americans. And it got here by a bipartisan agreement, right? Every year, regardless of who was in charge, the funding increased. Every year, regardless of who was in charge, we heard this language of security. We heard the language that immigrants are dangerous, that we need to protect our borders. And it was all a lie. It's always all been a lie.
Yeah, well, speaking of bipartisanship, so you may have seen recently, Hillary Clinton giving a talk and basically saying that sort of, I mean, so she was kind of boasting about the fact that her husband and Barack Obama had deported more people, but without killing anybody. And so, I mean, she wasn't bragging necessarily about the deportations, but that they had all been done nonviolently.
More people were deported under my husband and Barack Obama without killing American citizens and without putting children into detention camps than were in the first Trump term or this first year of Trump's second term.
I mean, I guess my larger question is, as someone who writes about migration and really looks at the humanity of people who immigrate, I mean, deportation, I guess, do we really need to have a serious conversation about, just immigration and deportation in general? Because obviously people who are, people don't just pack up and just decide to leave their country for no reason, right? And when they come not through official channels, it's usually because the situation is very urgent or desperate, right? So what's my question? Well, maybe you can just speak to that since you are someone who actually looks at them as human beings and not just as a demographic that needs to be removed.
Yeah.
But if you can do it without killing people, great.
Well, I mean, I make it so I actually haven't watched that clip because I make it
Yeah.
as a point of my life to not watch that woman.
Okay, fair enough. Well, that's
just
so
act
I
like she
did it.
doesn't exist.
Right. I did it so you don't have to.
I think we all get like a pass to like ostrich on a few people, and she's
Sure.
definitely one of mine.
Okay.
But there's no such thing as nonviolent deportation. There's no such thing as nonviolent deportation. You have to capture the person. You have to detain them, in which they are separated violently from their family, from their loved ones, from their belongings, from everything that they've known. Then you have to force them on a plane to take them somewhere that they, in some cases, have never been. I haven't been since they were babies.
Yeah.
And like the idea that nobody was hurt, people die in ICE detention every year. I mean, the number of people who are dying in ICE detention now are higher, but people die in ICE detention every single year. And actually, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that the number of people who died in 2025 under Trump was the same as the number of people who died in early on. I think it was like 2003 or maybe 2011, but sometime when it wasn't Trump, right? So it's not that even the numbers are that discrepant, even though I do believe that the numbers for 2026 are far exceeding those earlier years. But the point that I'm making is that detention is torture, and activists have made this claim for a really long time, and I agree with them completely. But also, and I was, as you were talking, I wanted to get the information right. But in 2007, a man named Davina Watson, an American citizen, was detained for 1,273 days, right? That's like 3 years, despite repeatedly telling officers that he was a citizen. And this was in 2007. And so the idea that like these systems have always worked correctly, and the reason why Davina Watson is able to be held for such a long time is that, even though the Constitution does in fact protect due process for everybody, right? Any human within the United States in theory is protected by the due process clause. In practice, because there's this notion that migration is actually a civil procedure that isn't violent, right? The entirety of our immigration system, the entirety of our immigration law is actually it's actually a form of civil law. So what that means is that people within the criminal legal system, as fucked as it is, get more protections than people in the immigration deportation system, despite the fact that these people over here have not committed a crime. Right? So you don't get access to a lawyer. They don't have to Mirandize you. What we saw with Eli Arayeva when they lied entering, they do that all the time. Now, the jury's out on whether that's completely legal for them, but they do it all the time, and they do it as a matter of practice. They don't have to follow. Whereas, if a police officer did that, it would be completely, it's unacceptable, right? Not to say that they don't also lie, but that is a very clearly unacceptable thing. It's clearly it would clearly corrupt the case. You can have expedited removal in the immigration system, where you don't even get a case FaceTime with the court at all. And so what we have is a system that, despite the fact that operates with some notion of due process, the due process is so discrepant from anything that you or I would recognize as due process that it also creates, not only is deportation torture, but it's also sort of, very authoritarian. It's always been sort of a fascist system within a state that recognizes itself as democratic. And Black folks are way more likely to be detained than any other category of immigrant. And so it's also a racist, in addition to it being racist in the ethnic cleansing sense of the word, it's also anti-Black specifically, which is something that I think is not getting enough attention right now.
Yeah, well, that's certainly something that should be getting attention as well. So a few questions. One, I guess the first one is rhetorical. If they have all of these resources and surveillance technology and all of these, just all this, bureaucratic support, why were they not able to determine that this gentleman was an American citizen, first of all, for what was it? You said 1,000 and how many days?
Yeah,
72
well,
days?
let me tell you, hold on. I have it here.
So that's
1,200, and I think it was 1,273.
yeah, which also just but raises the question of these detentions, right? Like if you're quote unquote, if they're capturing someone to deport them, what is the logic, behind, who gets detained indefinitely, who gets sent to some torture prison in El Salvador, um, so that, and then maybe from there we could also segue into the question of all these like big facilities now that they're building, these detention facilities. Is that what some people are sounding the alarm about? In other words, is that going to be used later on down the road for everybody that the government has an issue with?
Is this the gulag?
Yes. I
Gulag's
mean,
here.
for activists, for anyone who is, anyone who posts something on social media that they don't like.
Yeah.
Or
So, yeah, I think in my professional opinion, the reason why Davina Watson was able to be held for such a long time, the reason why this whole, people are being treated in this way is that these people don't give a fuck, right? Like
yeah.
they just, and it's a system designed not to give a fuck. It's like a systemic don't give a fuck, right? Systemic inability to see, systemic refusal to see people as human beings. And it's at every level. So like it's rhetorical. So there's been so much written about like the language used by CBP and ICE and how the language is super dehumanizing. So one of the people who was recently detained, she was grabbed out of her car and she has a disability. I'm actually blanking on her name right now. But she described how they refer to them as bodies the entire time. It's like, we've got 4 bodies in the back. There's 2 bodies in the front. They're not referring to people as human, right? When we saw, for instance, with the Dilley Detention Center, when the kids wrote letters about their experiences, right, and colored them, they went in and confiscated the letters from the kids. The mothers are talking about how they're speaking, the officers are yelling and condescending and chiding their children. This is not, the separation, the Liam Ramos and with the hat, right? How are you taking a child from their, like, how does it work for you to take a child from their parents in this way? Noor al-Alam Sheikh, how does it work for you to leave an old man in the street by himself?
Yeah.
If you don't know somebody, like if I don't know anything about a person and somebody drops an old man in my house, I'm not putting him in the street.
Yeah.
He's not in my care. I'm not putting him in the street. If I find him in the lobby of my building, I'm not putting him in the street. I'm like, oh, he's disoriented. There's just no way, no shot that I'm leaving him in the street for most people. And so there's basic decency. And these people may, and this is sort of the beauty of Hannah Arendt and the beauty of other people who have written about these moments of fascism. It's like these people may be good people in their, or good, may
Yeah.
think of themselves as decent people in their normal everyday interactions. But in this scenario, in this framework, they have so dehumanized these people who are in front of them. There's just such a concerted effort to distance that you get this abject horror of treatment. And and I want to be very clear, it is systemic. So these prisons, the for-profit prisons that are run by ICE detentions, because again, this is a civil process, remember, it's not a criminal process. So they aren't under regulation. They basically operate on the basis of local agreements. There's nothing fucking regulating this.
Mhm.
And what that ends up looking like are these detention facilities that they're not providing healthcare anymore. They're
Yeah.
not providing schooling for these kids. They're detaining children. There are children inside American prisons. What we're talking about is something that, the atrocity level, and I appreciate this question of like, is this the gulag? Are we all going in? But that really shouldn't be our question, because there are people who are already in. And if we're not separating, if we don't believe that we are more worthy, that our lives are more worthy than these people, then the atrocity is already here. We're
Yeah.
already there.
No, I mean, I totally agree. I know it it's something that I struggle with in the public discourse, because I see this and I think, well, yeah, obviously this is something we should talk about as well, that this is, if people are going to make claims about fascism, then show us, show us where it's, I mean, obviously there's always been, fascism toward marginalized people in this country, citizen or not. Um, but yeah, obviously, even if the gulags are not intended for uh, American citizens, they're this still not something that we want to be allowing to be happening here. So I guess that raises a larger question. I mean, obviously there are people, again, Minneapolis being the main case study right now, who are standing up for immigrants, whether they're undocumented or not. And you gave a great talk last week at the People's Forum, Limits of American Revolt, which of course, raises, I think, a question that many people are grappling with, what are the limits of what we can do? Where are the lines? What do we need to be willing to give up, for to fight all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, at the core of this, and you talked about the book at the outset,
Mhm.
um, is that every time we don't speak up, every instance we allow of a neighbor being kidnapped, of the expansion of this apparatus, of voting in somebody who is okay with this or isn't running on a platform of being against it, um, what we're allowing and enabling is the destruction of our own families. I mean, we are destroying, the United States is systematically voting in fascism
Yeah.
and destroying the fabric of, and this country is flawed. It's flawed by design, right? It's based in a genocide. It grows through enslavement. Racism is at the core of its genesis. It's at the core of immigration policy. It's at the core of education, of all policy, right? Race is sort of the defining feature of the United States due to those original sins. But what made this country great is its diversity, is the fact that you and I here, I'm imagining, you're Greek, or
Well, Iranian actually on my mother's side. Yeah.
Persian on your mother's side, right?
Yes.
I'm Egyptian, right? I'm
Uh-huh.
married to an Italian. I'm gonna walk across the street and I'm gonna meet people just from here to the next block. I'm gonna meet people from 20 different, origins with 20 different histories. If I'm meeting 20 people, they're all gonna have 20 different stories to tell me, right? If I stopped and asked them, tell me about your family history. An incredibly unique and powerful thing, and that is what's always made this country great. And so now, what we've allowed, and it's been sort of a boiling of the frog in a sense, right? What we've allowed is a very slow, but extraordinarily violent process of creep, where we said, oh, well, for our security, you need to surveil, deny, detain, torture those people over there. Okay, but now
Yeah.
I have the tools and I've tortured those people. Okay, so it's a wider net of people. Okay, well, I've tortured those people and now I have more tools and I have all this equipment. So let me get and now it's just it's here. It's here. And people have voted this in because they've been told that security is the goal. And they've been told that immigrants are dangerous. And they've been told this, Kamala Harris famously said, do not come here to
Yeah.
people in Guatemala. Right? It's not just a Republican thing.
No, for sure. Do you think that? I mean, obviously, we can't determine the data perhaps in this conversation, but I mean, do you think there's still too much emphasis on, oh, well, then we just have to vote him out and we can go back to normal, or do you see that there is more of a political awakening among people, and that there really has to be more emphasis on organizing and resisting power, regardless of what party is in office?
Yeah, I have to say, so I, do I think, okay, I'm going to start with the positive. Do I think
Okay,
that
let's
more
do that.
people are awakening to the fact that we need a change? Absolutely, right? We're seeing, membership in the Democratic Socialists doubled. Zohran Mamdani was elected in New York City over like the Democratic darling of Cuomo, where he's like emblematic,
Yes.
like the poster boy of that kind of corrupt, like do nothing Democrat, but that they love to fucking vote for. So like,
Yeah.
that was a big deal. Um, we're seeing more and more local candidates. For instance, here in New York 13, I'm supporting Daria Lisa Chevalier, and Conrad Blackburn is also here, not in New York. He's running for assembly. And so what we have is we have this like groundswelling of folks that are coming up, and a lot of people who are more attentive to that kind of local politics. But I think that something that I am seeing that I think that is really damaging, or is really a problem, is that a lot of people do think that we just need to go back to normal. That like if
Yeah.
you vote this out in November, everything's going to be fine and we're going to regain control and we're going to go back to normal. Missing the fact that the Democrats in office are, I think that that Mamdani, for instance, going to speak to Trump, securing the release it's a small example, but it's like these people could be doing so much more. Why are they not down at that detention center? Why are our Democratic leaders not there on hunger strike saying, if you don't let these kids out, we're going to die here en masse? Why can't they actually like do something, right? And maybe the hunger strike idea is a stupid one, but do something. Do something. Put your bodies on. If we elected you to protect the democracy and to hold our voice, you have to be willing to fight for our freedom. You have to be willing to do something. And they are actually There are very, very few Democratic elected officials who have even said the words abolish ICE, despite the fact that the American public opinion has so shifted so far on the issue, right? Abolish ICE used to be like a fringe thing for us and our lefty friends. Now, more Americans say abolish ICE than not. That's huge.
Yeah, I
But
know.
still, they won't. And they're watching the same shit we're watching. And they're condemning it on individual. They're like, yeah, man, that really sucks that this blind man was left
Yeah.
out to die. Okay, so what the fuck are you going to do about it? I'm going to write a strongly worded statement about how you should vote for me in November.
Yeah.
Literally, that's what Adriano Espaillat, our local elected official here in Harlem, did yesterday. He was like, oh, well, it really sucks that this girl was kidnapped. Make sure you vote in November. In November, sir, this is happening now. She's kidnapped now. She's now currently kidnapped, detained. What are you doing now?
And aren't they saying one of the things they're saying is that ICE needs better training? Is that what
Body cams.
Body cams?
We have this all on footage. We have on footage
Right.
them blowing her brains out. We have on footage them killing Alex Preddy. We have it all. We have the footage. We have the footage. Doesn't help to have the footage. They don't care. It's belligerent. The belligerence is the point. The cruelty is the point. And to an earlier part of the conversation, I think the fact that she was an influencer is why they targeted her, because they like the spectacle of cruelty. They like it. They think that's the point. The point is that we are white supremacists. We are better. And we are going to ethnically cleanse you using, by the way, people of color, because a lot of the ICE officers are people of color, which is a really fascinating aspect of this, using them as foot soldiers with the promise of loan forgiveness, which just goes, with the capital. We have eroded these people's lives through our capitalist neoliberal policies to such an extent that they are so thirsty for reprieve because they have their own families to feed that they are willing to be the foot soldiers of an ethnic cleansing operation that targets them as well. I mean, if this is not, like, I don't know, I'm not like one of the people with the stages of capitalism, but like, this is fucked. It's dystopic. I mean, it's like turn off the Black Mirror and watch real life, because that is a mess.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so all right. Well, we don't have to delve into late stage capitalism then, if you don't want to, but I'm sure it'll somehow find its way into, particularly if we want to talk about the mainstream media and media consolidation, which is something I would like to get into. I guess before we go there, just staying on this thread of electoral politics, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about the recent, I guess you could call it a leak, even though many of us who've been paying attention have known this pretty much since November of 24. That
The Gaza,
yes,
the report.
yes. So I guess the Democrats' internal polling or post-mortem found that Gaza was the main issue that cost Kamala Harris votes and potentially cost her the election. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about this in terms of, like,
my only thought is these people are fucking exhausting. Like,
what, the Democrats or
yeah, the Democrats, like, although they're just discovering, it's like, yeah, like people want to vote. I mean, people want to vote for somebody who is authentic. And we could say a lot about Trump and that election, and there's a lot of different factors that shaped, right? And I think a lot of it is actually why she more so why she lost than why she won, is sort of more of the explanatory power in that story. But people want to vote for authenticity. People are attracted to authenticity, whether it's in our media environment or in our electoral politics. They don't want to vote for things that feel phony, or they aren't attracted to things that feel phony. And I think that to say that you are the party of justice and democracy and all of these things, but to simultaneously be talking about the deadliest military in the world and funding a genocide unabashedly. And I think, we lose sense that actually most people, and I still want to believe this, even though maybe I'm naive, most people are decent to an extent, right? Like, most people don't want the babies killed. I still believe that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think most people, like, don't want to kill babies or don't want to watch babies being killed. And so when that is a big part of your platform and you're refusing to back off of it, you're refusing to update, you're saying I'm speaking when people are trying to disrupt, to bring up the dead babies. I think that just doesn't sit well. And I think Mamdani's electoral victory speaks to the fact that people are hungry for populist politics that are truly populist, that
Yeah.
have that relationship with the humanity of people, right? That are inherently decent. And I think that, and also that center Palestine in their sort of human story. And so I think that this is not surprising. It's exhausting that they are discovering this now with this polling, et cetera, that I'm sure they really worked hard to suppress. And
Yeah.
that they refuse to learn from it. They won't learn from it. And it's just a party that's drifted so far away from anything that resembles, any kind of alternative to this like sort of neoliberal ravaging and this dehumanization that we're witnessing now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's part of the point, right? That th- not that they're just realizing that Gaza was the issue, but that the fact that they tried to suppress this information, which is not surprising. But one thing I struggle with in terms of the Palestine issue is, of course, there, you hear this is, don't be a single issue voter or this and that, and um, it's sort of this being torn between trying to explain how it's not just a single issue and just wanting to say, even if it wasn't connected to all these other things, like, shouldn't it be enough for us to just not want to fund a genocide? You know?
Yeah, I mean, agree on both counts, right? Like, I struggle with this too because I'm like, if you're against ICE, then you should really be against the IDF. If
Yeah.
you're, like, and I struggle with that. But at the same time, it's like, for me, Palestine has become a litmus test. So it's
Yes.
like, oh, I'm progressive. Where do you stand on Palestine? Where you stand on Palestine, to me, tells me whether you're actually committed to our collective liberation or whether you're somebody who's saying the words but not actually committed to that fight. Because it's still a costly position to hold, right? I mean, we see colleagues losing their jobs over it. It's a costly position to hold because of the Palestine exception. We've seen, the students detained over it. Um, while at the same time, it is the only position that's possible to hold if you're a person of moral integrity. I think. I mean, you cannot watch the system of apartheid, occupation, and genocide and have nothing to say about it. It's just so cut and dry.
Yeah. Um, so speaking of having something to say, so you said something interesting in your talk last week as well about how, about various forms of organizing and correct me if I'm misparaphrasing you, but you basically said, whatever, you when you write and post something online, like, that's a form of organizing, which I thought was intriguing. As someone who writes a lot on my Substack, I appreciated that remark. I so so the question is, what should we say when we no that so yeah, I mean, I guess I'd like to explore that idea a little bit, but also just in thinking in terms of that being a counterweight to the mainstream media, and we could talk about how they are an obstacle to a the truth, and b resisting a lot of what's going on with our government right now, just in terms of ICE, in terms of the state repression, and the now there the apparently the whether likely or possible acquisition by the Ellisons now of Warner Brothers Discovery. That they already bought Paramount and CBS News. Now they're eyeing Warner Brothers and CNN. And I guess how concerned should we be, or is this the moment for everyone to say, okay, well, the mainstream media is just, like, not a real thing anymore, and it's just
Yeah.
a
Yeah. I
propaganda
mean,
machine.
so when I say that, like, writing is a form of organizing, it's like, I think that when I write, I don't write to convince somebody who is far to the right of me. Like, it's just not gonna happen. They're not reading my piece in good faith, and, that rarely happens. Like, just historically rarely happens. I write to organize people who are genuinely, when they open the piece that I write, are genuinely interested in reading what I have to say. And that could be people who are not 100% politically aligned with me. So, I'm very left of center, so they might be people who are closer to that center mark, but who are also upset at what's going on. And I think that when you write, you give people a framing, a history, particularly like I write almost exclusively on immigration, sometimes on Palestine, but I always write about how we got here, how we got here historically. Like, that's sort of been my shtick, right? Like, we're here. How do we get here, and how do we make sense of it given our this historical moment and how it connects to past historical moments? And I think that gives people a sense, and in your writing as well, I'm sure, it gives people a sense of like where we are and how to speak about this moment that we're in. And I think that people writing about abolishing ICE, writing about the history of ICE, is why so many people who would otherwise have been like, no, we don't want to abolish ICE, are like, oh yeah, maybe this shouldn't have ever existed, right? It goes from being a marginal position to a more central position because so many people are framing it and educating people on it. And so that's what the role of language in the public sphere is, right? Whether it be, and I made my first reel yesterday actually about Ellie's abduction in the morning. But we're trying, I find myself trying all these different outlets because how do you reach people to be able to put another sort of way out of thinking about this specific thing that happened that everybody's paying attention to, right? People need narrative framing. And that said, that's why it's so, so pernicious what we're watching happen now. Because there's an oligarchical class, right? There is this class of billionaires. These are the richest people in America
Mm-hmm.
who are buying up our media and in order to control what exists in the public sphere. And so, right now there's a campaign in New York, a Tax the Rich campaign. Well, if we had a media that was true news, right? In a way that it existed before. And we actually had this diversity of news outlets. We didn't have this consolidation. And we have, a lot of different journalists sort of reporting. We would have massive reporting on this, right? But what we are seeing is like, and particularly now, even our sort of traditional classic outlets like the New York Times has lost all forms of credibility. It's anti-trans, anti-Palestine. They've pro-fascism in some instances. They've put out so much garbage and they've participated in the public discourse in ways that have really lost them tremendous amounts of credibility. The Washington Post just fired all of its photojournalists, right? Dramatic transformation. I recently had an experience with Time Magazine where they solicited an article for me about Mamdani and Muslims for me to write. I pitched them a piece about Mamdani having the audacity of portraying Muslims as human, right? With all flaws, etc., just, humanizing Muslims. And we went through the editing process. It was great. And then they said, oh, here's the final piece. It said Zohran Mamdani and the radical idea that Muslims belong. Very nationalist, very white-centric. They completely changed my language. And I actually ended up, if you actually look Heba Gowayed Time Magazine, you'll still see my author page up. But I refused for them. I withdrew the piece. I said, you will not publish this, despite the fact that we had another round of edits where they tried to appease me. And so what we have, and that's because they were also bought out, right? But their editors were still sort of hoping for a different kind of piece. And so what we have in this moment is just a complete, and that I'm giving you that example to show how this is an active censoring of voice in order
Yeah.
to push an image that is not actually capturing the diversity of America or the diversity of these viewpoints. This is extraordinarily dangerous. This is maybe the most dangerous move, in my opinion, that has happened in the last couple of years, is this consolidation, which is going to have reverberations on everything else we're talking about.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit more about the Washington Post firings? Because I think, a lot of people have heard about it, but it, sort of like how it was framed, because obviously yeah, it's like we know that this is a form of, censorship or suppression, but, uh, like, how is the Post, saying, "Oh, this is just downsizing," or what, like, what is the narrative around these moves?
Yeah, so I'm not actually remembering right now off the top of my head exactly what the Washington Post's rationale was, but it was
Mhm.
definitely like, "We don't need these it was
Right.
basically it's not just a downsizing or the public impression that we got was not just that it was a downsizing in the sense that, like, we're losing money, like, these people have more money than God.
Of course.
It's a sense that we don't value,
Yeah.
this kind of, transparency or this kind of clarity or this kind of news anymore. Right? Because basically, when you don't have your own photojournalists, you're going to sort of rely on whatever exists in the public. They also fired, I think, a lot of their journalists. Also, a year prior, Karen Ataya was removed from her
Right.
position due to was it about on Charlie Kirk or was it something else? I think it was Charlie Kirk.
I think it was something that she
It
had,
was thinking it was related to Charlie Kirk. I'm sorry, there's just so much happening that's so fucked that everything is blurring, but,
yeah.
she was removed over a retweet, actually, and now I'm remembering, a retweet about Charlie Kirk, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, they then proceeded to remove all of their columnists all their Black columnists, so I don't think they have any anymore, and so
Yeah.
what we're having is and it is, it is a moment that's anti-Black, it's anti, diversity, and a lot of these, like, a lot of these sort of media companies and a lot of these industries are, like, not being shy about it anymore, you know? It's like, it's sort of, yeah, we like white people and, like, go fuck yourselves, essentially.
Yeah. Um, and was that I don't know if this was before the chart. Yeah, I guess I'm just looking at this really quick. This was February of 25, where Bezos had made that
Yeah.
strange statement about how the op-eds were now just gonna be devoted to personal liberties and free markets.
That's right, that's right, that's right. Yeah, and
Um,
they cut more than 300 jobs,
yeah,
30% of their workforce.
yeah, so it's very I mean, I guess, I mean, I know your specialty isn't, media history. I should actually, have more information about this. I'm just wondering if there's, like, sort of a precedent of this type of, behavior in terms of just being so blatantly, vocal about, like, how we are going to frame our nose as opposed to the kind of the historically, um, you know, the historical, presentation of the mainstream media as, speaking truth to power and,
Yeah,
I don't know,
there's
it's
professional but, like, the McCarthy era comes to mind, right? Like,
sure.
that sort of but also authoritarians do this. So you can look within United States history, you can look
Yeah,
at the McCarthy era where the targets were specifically, content creators, for lack of a better word, right? We didn't have that word back then, but, like, um, they were
yeah,
musicians and movie producers and, like,
right,
trying to control what exists in the public sphere. Um, Authoritarians also specifically want to consolidate, news coverage and make it in the hands of sort of the central authority. So,
right,
Egypt, which I talked about during I'm Egyptian, which I talked
yeah,
about in the People's Forum, um, is is an example of that where state-controlled media dominates, where if you speak out of turn, if you're an independent media, they will crack down on your offices, they will arrest your journalists, etc. So we haven't gotten quite to the arrest part yet, but we're using capital to basically do what authoritarians often do with clubs, right? We're
yeah,
using capital to say, well, we're just going to control it all, and therefore, your voice is going to be sequestered via the fact that we're buying up and
yeah,
destroying these spaces that you look to for information. Unfortunately, people don't shift quick enough, right? So people are still going to read the Washington Post and think, okay, well, this is the outlet that I've always looked to, or the New York Times, or any of these outlets. But what we're seeing already, for instance, with Colbert and what is his name? Tellerico?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's
Yeah, the interview there, like, they're increasingly trying to infringe on what people can say on on their
right,
platforms.
right. Yeah, no, yeah, the McCarthy era, it definitely comes to mind. I was just thinking, in terms of like in terms of an actual, publisher or head of a media outlet just being so blatant about, yes, we are not going to essentially try to uphold journalistic ideals. I mean, obviously, when I think of McCarthy era, I think of, Edward R. Murrow coming out as sort of the hero of that era, really using the press as a way to combat that kind of state repression. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm not able to find the perfect analog at this point, but uh, yeah. Anyway, it's yeah. There's a lot to digest with all of this. Um, yeah. So speaking of the 2011 revolution in Egypt, what they call the Arab Spring here. Uh, you took part in that, right?
Yes.
Do you want to share anything? I mean, about. I mean, I know you have some thoughts about sort of how that ultimately played out, and whether you think there's anything instructive from that can be applied here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I said this on the panel. I think that that when we think about protest movements, or when we think about revolution, right? Or like really dramatic shifts in a society, we it's interesting because they're both talked about like, oh, we need to prompt this to happen, right? We need to organize towards this, we need to create it. But often they're also talked about as like, oh, it just happened, right? So like it's like there isn't really a lead up to it, that these massive movements are like, oh, and it came out of nowhere, right? And I think the actual truth of it is that it's somewhere in between, which is that the ties that we create now, your rapid response networks, your organizing, these conversations, the people with whom you create connections now are the people who you're going to are the ties that are going to be important to activate in the event that people that something does sort of start to go down, right? And it's really hard to anticipate when that sort of precipice moment comes. But it's those ties, it's those connections, it's the organizations that you're already a part of that then become activated. And I gave the example of soccer fandoms. So in the Egyptian case, for instance, there were the ultras who were supporters of our two main national clubs, Ahli and Zamalek, and they were a big players, right? Of course, also the Muslim Brotherhood, who were already organized on college campuses, in local communities and local neighborhoods. So you have all of these different organizations of people that then become activated, but also in the square, there were people who went to college together, and people who were from the same neighborhood, and people from the same family. And that sense of security and safety came from the fact that you had the tie with that person prior, and you came to the event with them. And mind you, these are all, I mean, except for the Muslim Brotherhood, of course, these are all kind of apolitical or not explicitly political organizations. And I think that the point that I was making on the panel specifically, is that we have to be attentive. We have to invest in our communities systematically, and make an effort. You need to know your neighbors. You need to know. You need to be invested in like local groups. For instance, for immigration defense, your local food bank, your local food pantry. Do you know where that is? Are you able to help support people who need that access? And I think these kinds of investments we think of as being sort of a separate sphere from political organizing. But when things actually happen, when protest movements happen, they are local, they are localized. And so if you're part of a national organization, that might be a way to sort of organize and to connect people in other places. But ultimately, as we're seeing in Minneapolis right now, that shit's block by block, right? And
Yeah.
so we need to make sure that we also are familiar with our blocks and are comfortable in our communities and do know who our neighbors are. Because when it's coming, it is sort of physical and localized in a world in which we relate to each other far more often on social media and on sort of electronically. But this is analog. It's definitionally analog.
Well, yeah. Those are all great advice, great tips for people to think about, and yeah, it certainly is so important to really, pay attention to, the people who are actually around us and really, yeah, forging ties with them. Um, so I think, yeah, that's actually, I think, a good place for us to wrap things up. Can you tell us, where can folks find you on the internet? If there's anything else you want to tell us about, what you're up to, when we should look out for your new book.
Yeah, I mean, when you should look out for my new book is in the process.
Sure.
I wish I could answer that question, but
No
I
worries.
can't answer it yet. But hopefully soon, and hopefully I'll have some updates on that soon. But you can find me on Instagram on Gowayed, so just my last name on Instagram, or on Blue Sky, which is first and last name. I used to be on X, but I've reduced my use of it for all the aforementioned
Mhm.
reasons that we've talked about. And I have actually a new sort of endeavor with my friend Victor Ray called Group Threat. So we're just at groupthreat.com, which is about race and politics. I write about immigration, and Victor writes about American race and specifically Black politics. And so, come find us and subscribe. That's sort of newer. Yeah, and it's great to be here. Great to talk to you, Kuros. Thank you for creating this platform and this space, and for making the time to chat.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Heba. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Right of Resistance. Please join us next time for more talk about propaganda, injustice, and ways to resist. Thanks for watching. If you liked this episode, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and consider supporting the show on Patreon. Right of Resistance is an independent podcast. We don't have corporate sponsors or media backers. We rely on listeners like you. So if you want to help us grow, visit patreon.com/rightofresistance to become a member for as little as $3 a month. Every contribution makes a difference.